Here's the 30-second lesson on what legends know. Never practice nunchucks in a crowded room. Never eat chole before a road trip. Always take your shirt off before you iron it. Don't take a call near a swimming pool. And don't forget, saving is not investing. Legends don't just save, they invest in mutual funds. Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Lashed by the dirt thrown up by the horses of the men hunting him down, Maulana Rahmatullah Kairanavi bent even lower. The East India Company's soldiers never realized that the cowering grass cutter was the theologian on whose head a price of 1,000 rupees had been placed. The country belongs to God and its command belongs to Maulvi Rahmatullah, cried the Mujahideen he had led into jihad against the English in 1857. Fanaticism proved no match for modern artillery though, or the Enfield rifle musket. Leaving behind his land and wealth, the cleric had to flee to Mecca. For days now, Islamic pop preacher Zakir Naik, wanted in India for inciting religious hatred, has been generating outrage in Pakistan. Like his critics in India and Bangladesh, liberals in Pakistan have discovered that misogyny and chauvinism lie at the heart of Zakir Naik's message. To many, it even seems bizarre that a country being torn about by religious bigotry chose to invite Naik as a state guest. Like others on the religious right wing, Naik has drunk deep from the poisoned wells of Indian identity movements of the 19th century. Movements which locked the region's religions in violent contestation against each other. For generations after colonialism, traumatized by economic and cultural power of the West, this new kind of Islam asserted that faith needs no reform or introspection. Tied to the 2-century-old intellectual legacy of Kairanavi, the Islam Naik propagates emerged as traditional religious authority slowly disintegrated under colonialism. Islam, just like Hinduism, increasingly feared annihilation by scientific materialism and evangelical Christianity. Kairanavi's Izharul Haq, a rebuttal of missionary critiques of Islam, profoundly influenced Ahmad Deedat, a South African cleric financed by Saudi Arabia's religious establishment. The pop Salafism pioneered by Deedat in turn prepared the ground for Naik and his televangelist media empire. Eminent officials of the East India Company, editors of Agra newspapers, leading notables of the city, and hundreds of ordinary spectators fought to find space inside the missionary school compound nestled in Agra's bazaar. For 2 days over the Easter weekend of 1854, the city's intellectuals were to go to war, pitting the god of the emperor Muhammad Shah Zafar against the god of the East India Company. The natives, both Mohammedan and Hindu, were trooping in groups that could not all gain access to the building, the missionary T.G. Clark recorded. From the time of the Abbasid Caliphs, historian Hans Harmakaputra reminds us, the courts of Islamic rulers had often hosted similar munazara or debates. This was different though, the debate in Agra. The question of who the one true God was had begun to become a public matter. Ever since the terrible drought of 1837, historian Avril Powell has written in her brilliant account of the encounter between colonial missionaries and Islam, efforts to spread Christianity had intensified around Agra and Delhi. An orphanage had been set up in Agra which missionaries hoped would form the core of a future Christian community. Tensions had begun to rise too around the new Anglo-Oriental College in Delhi, where Europe's science had begun to seduce a generation of young elite Muslims and Hindus. From the mid-19th century, a succession of books appeared subjecting Islam to sometimes hostile scrutiny. Alois Sprenger, the Austrian-born physicist and linguist who led the college until 1851, caused a lot of offense with his biography of the Prophet Muhammad, which suggested that he shared, and I quote, the amiable foibles and selfish virtues of other men of his age. Then, in 1852, the college's eminent mathematics professor, Panipat-born Ramchandra, long a religious skeptic, converted to Christianity, together with the surgeon Chaman Lal. Abdullah Athim, an Ambala resident serving as a magistrate in Sindh, followed them, publishing an extended refutation of Islam. Kairanavi, the son of an eminent cleric himself, emerged as the leading voice of theological opposition to these new tendencies. Tracing his intellectual heritage to Sayyid Ahmad Shahid of Rai Bareli, a leader of a failed jihad against Maharaja Ranjit Singh's empire, Kairanavi's work aimed at securing a civilizational triumph of Islam, scholar Seema Alavi has noted. The Farsi language Azalat al-Shukuk, published in 1853, directly addressed missionary critiques of Islam. Later, Kairanavi would publish elaborate refutations of Christian doctrine like the Holy Trinity. Equipped with access to the latest European works of biblical criticism, a science that was just emerging, Powell writes that Kairanavi and his lieutenants demolished his ill-equipped missionary opponent, Karl Pfander. The events of 1857, though, made pretty clear that the sword was a lot mightier than the pen. Even though he secured the patronage of the Ottoman court in Turkey, Kairanavi never succeeded in returning home to India. The man who carried forward Kairanavi's message was not a theologian nor a scholar of Islam. Likely born around 1918 in a village near Surat, Ahmad Deedat had left India at the age of 9, moving with his father to Durban in South Africa. There, scholar David Westerlund records, he studied at a madrasa and the Hindu-run Tamil Institute. Lacking the means to continue his education, though, Deedat began working at a store. There, in that store in 1939, he first encountered Christian missionaries who relentlessly challenged his religious convictions. Finding a copy of Kairanavi's Izharul Haq in the store's warehouse, so the story goes, Deedat discovered the intellectual tool he needed to respond to the missionaries. I quote, when the British conquered India, they realized that anytime anybody will give them trouble, it will be the Muslims, because power, rule, dominion were in their hands, Deedat later told a journalist. And the Muslims were militant people in contrast with the Hindus, who were as docile as the cows they were worshipping. Though Deedat does not mention the race of the missionaries he encountered, scholar Samia Saduni believes that they were almost certainly black students of the Adams Institute, which had become the powerhouse of the community after apartheid closed other educational doors. To Deedat, she writes, quote, Christianity rather than racial politics was the aggressor and main threat to the Muslim world. Following a brief immigration to Pakistan in 1949, Deedat returned home disillusioned by the new Islamic Republic. In 1957, he founded the Islamic Propagation Center in Durban, centered on Dawah or proselytization. The center received extensive assistance from religious institutions in Saudi Arabia, a country which would grant Deedat state honors in 1985 for his services to Islam. Even though apartheid was the defining experience of Deedat's South Africa, Saduni notes, he made no mention of it in his work. The apartheid regime, for its part, was content to tolerate Deedat's anti-evangelist polemics. In the 1980s and 90s, Deedat engaged in a succession of debates with prominent evangelical opponents. The American neo-fundamentalist Jimmy Swaggart, the Palestinian Christian Anis Soros, and the Swedish Pentecostal pastor Stanley Sjöberg being just some examples. Ahead of a trip to the United Kingdom, Deedat's publicity material proclaimed an invasion in reverse. The British ruled over India, Egypt, Malaysia, etc. for over 100 years. Now for the conquest of Britain for Islam. These English language public debates, modeled on American evangelist television, were circulated worldwide by the new medium of video cassettes as well as by books. The West Didat preached was a moral morass beset by alcoholism, homosexuality, prostitution, and sexual depravity. Little is known about how Zakir Naik came into contact with Didat. Together with his father Abdul Karim Naik, the young medical student invited the South African cleric to a conference held in Mumbai in 1987. Didat returned again the following year. Then, in 1991, Naik left his fledgling medical practice and set up the Islamic Research Foundation, or IRF. According to Sadhuni, Didat was scheduled to return to India again in 1995, but was denied a visa because his derogatory comments about Hinduism provoked angry protests on the streets of Durban. These controversies didn't stop Naik's rise, though. Like his mentor, Naik studiously avoided political controversy. There is no mention in the IRF's archives of the Babri Masjid dispute or even the anti-Muslim violence which tore apart Mumbai in 1992-1993. This allowed Naik to remain close to the state's political class while at once working to sharpen group boundaries between Muslims and Hindus. Focused on a new generation of educated middle-class Muslims, Naik's English medium, suit-clad Islam served as an opiate which dulled the pain of discrimination, economic backwardness, and political disempowerment. The pseudo-scientific gloss was thin, but Naik delivered his bizarre fabrications on issues like evolution or Charles Darwin with admirable self-confidence. The rise of the Indian Mujahideen terrorist group delivered the final challenge to Naik's cozy arrangement with power. Even though there is no accusation Naik was ever involved in terrorism, key figures in Mumbai's jihadist landscape, among them Lashkar-e-Taiba student Islamists Rahil Sheikh and Firoz Deshmukh, worked as volunteers in the IRF. Later, Islamists involved in terrorism in Bangladesh as well as recruits to the Islamic State were found to be big fans of Naik's speeches. Institutions like the IRF, terrorism researcher Abdul Basit notes, I quote, may not be directly involved in violent radicalization of vulnerable individuals, but the worldview they construct through their teachings make the job of violent extremist organizations easier. The real significance of Naik's journey to Pakistan ought be to engender reflection on the consequences and future costs of the toxic religious identity politics that was unleashed under colonialism. Failures to find other languages of belonging will mean remaining locked in a cycle of hate. I'm Praveen Swami and I'm a contributing editor to ThePrint. Thank you for watching this episode of Security Code.